No, we're fine. We're fine. Oh, welcome. This is the first installment of Bible Stories for Adults. I don't mean that they're like X-rated. I mean that they're going to be thoughtful. They're not going to be. We're not going to be just on the surface of things. But first, I should say that there are a number of considerations we want to think about. I want to talk about what the Bible is. First, I'll say what it's not. First of all, the Bible is not history. It is not history. Now, for those who believe that it is history, I don't. It's okay. Go ahead and think that. But what I'm saying is, from my perspective, it is not history. I don't think it was ever intended to be history. We look at the Hebrew Bible. The intention was to teach, to give lessons, life lessons. And the Bible is the story of our return to God. So we start off in Genesis. We find that what happens, and we'll talk about this particular part, we'll talk about next week, but in Genesis, we separate from God. And then the whole rest of the Bible is the story about our return to God, or as many of us refer to it, return to love. So today we're going to talk about Genesis, and the material, the particular translation that we are using is a Farrar Fenton Bible in Modern English. It was translated like in 1920, so may not be modern English to our ears, but it was modern English to him then. And what's important about Farrar Fenton is that he went back to the original texts, the original Hebrew, the original Chaldees, the original Hebrew, and he translated without the intervention of all of the scribes that got in the middle there. So you went back to the original, and it's very interesting what this says. One more thing I'd like to say about our approach to Bible here is that we approach it on three levels. First of all, there's the literal story. We do not believe that the literal story is the most important story. The literal story is just what it says. We would consider that to be like the physical aspect of the text. Just the story itself. And the story itself can be very entertaining from time to time. But if we just take the story and that's it, and we take the story literally, we cheat ourselves out of the richness that really we will find if we look a little bit deeper. Well, the mental aspect to the teaching is our own interpretation. So we read the story, whatever it is, or we read the book in the Bible or the passages that we happen to read today, and it says we read the literal thing, but then we allow ourselves to think about what it means to us today. What is this? How does it speak to me today? So it's, in other words, the mental aspect is our interpretation. And the fact of the matter is, even if we are of a mind to take the Bible literally, there is no escaping that we are interpreting it for ourselves. Each person is interpreting it a little bit differently. Some people would argue and say, oh no, what it says, this is the direct word of God. The problem is that each one of us has our own filters. And so we're all interpreting it. We may interpret it according to a certain philosophy, but even in that, each person is interpreting it differently. And then thirdly, and the most important, is the spiritual aspect of the work. And the spiritual approach is to allow the words to inspire the heart. And really, this is what we're looking for in any spiritual literature, is to allow this action to happen. So today we start with Genesis, the first book. And this is, Farrar Fenton puts a little note at the beginning. He says, the first book of Moses, called Genesis, translated direct from the Hebrew by Farrar Fenton. Now, something that we have come to realize historically is that although these first books of the Bible are credited to Moses, it just can't be. Sorry. It just doesn't work out historically. Moses didn't write these things, right? So, hopefully I didn't offend anyone. So here's how it starts, and it starts off different right from the very beginning when you go to the original Hebrew. The first creation of the universe by God, and then God is identified here, is identified by the Hebrew name, and it says right off the bat, Elohim is the name of God here in this particular translation, Elohim. And this is that is important. As we go forward, we'll see that God has a different name in different writings. In any event, this is by periods. This is the beginning. First one. By periods, God created that which produced the solar systems, plural. Then that which produced the earth. So right off the bat it says by periods. It doesn't say days. And he puts a little note down here. It says literally the word that is in Hebrew means by headships. Periods meaning by headships. Now this to me is quite clear that it has something to do with thought. Headships. So by periods, in other words, what he's saying right off the bat is we're not talking about 7 days. So so this literal translation of saying that the earth is created in 7 days is wrong on the face of it from the very beginning if you go to the original Hebrew. By periods. And not only that, but it says that it doesn't actually say he creates the solar system and the earth, but rather he creates that which produces the solar system and then later the earth. So this thinking now about scientific theory going forward is what it's really saying is that God starts the process. I mean, and remember what's going on here is you've got this is all contrary to mainstream opinion. This was not God sitting down with a piece of paper and a pen writing this. This was written by men. Men, divinely inspired or not, written by men with opinions, with their own filters. However divinely they were inspired, men wrote this down and they had a purpose for writing it down. They had an agenda, they had an audience who they were trying to speak to, they had an overall goal of what they wanted to accomplish. Well, one of the things they wanted to accomplish was to give an explanation as to how did all this stuff get here. How did it get here? And they wanted to give the explanation, of course, in line with the beliefs that they're holding. But the explanation seems, to me, here, much more reasonable than those that we've heard people put forward, that the earth is created in 7 days and that's it and that's the way it is. And when we know that this is just impossible and from the historical record cannot be true. So here, they were right. They had it. They were on the money. So he says, but the earth was unorganized and empty, and darkness covered its convulsed surface, while the breath of God rocked the surface of its waters. Now this is all symbolic language because actually the waters haven't even been created yet. I mean, this is coming later. But anyway, God says, let there be light. And light came. And God gazed upon that beautiful light, and then he divided the light from the darkness. And to the light God gave the name day, and to the darkness he gave the name night. And this was the close and the dawn of the first age. So here you're saying, one period's done. And he calls it an age. Now, traditionally, an age is considered to be 1,000 years. But we're talking about bigger ages here, but it's not really trying to be defined. So what we're talking about is from the beginning of Genesis, the process of evolution is being put forward. That this is happening over a period of time, and that what God did was start the process moving. Okay, so there's a congressman, it's on Yahoo, you can probably look at it, it was up there yesterday. There's a congressman from Georgia, I forget his name, it's okay. who got up and spoke to this group of people at a Baptist church in Georgia, and he said that the people who that evolution, that the message of evolution comes actually from hell. That it is a message from hell. What do you say? Evolution, embryology, and one other thing. I don't know. He says a message from hell. Well, I got to tell you that if we feel like we're separate from God, if we feel like we're separate from creation, if our sense of it is that we are hopeless sinners, well, everything is a message from hell. I mean, almost everything that because it's a message that confirms our separateness, our aloneness, which is what the Catholics defined many years ago, that hell was literally separation from God. So in that case, if we think we're separate, we're in hell. Anyway, God also said, let there be an expanse between the waters, and let there be a division between the waters and the waters. And he goes on here and he explains for people who are trying to figure out how it all happened, how there becomes dry land, how we've got oceans, we're going to name them, we're going to, all these explanations concerning how it all came to be. And at the end of each one, it says, this was the close and the dawn. So for this one, it says, it separated the waters. This is the close and the dawn of a second age. And then he says, let the waters below the heavens be collected in one place, let dry land appear. And he names the accumulated waters the seas. He admires their beauty. And in this whole thing, God is creating. Now, let's just think about this for a second. We might have talked a little bit about this last week, but the fact of the matter is, if in the beginning there was only God, and it seems like that was the case, there's only God, and he begins to do this creating, what is he created out of? I mean, if there's only God, the only raw material available is God. So actually what's going on here is God is extending of himself. He is creating out of himself. So then he says, God admired, he says, let there be fruit bearing, let fruit trees and seed bearing vegetation that are capable of reproduction upon the earth, and it was done. And the earth produced the seed bearing herbage according to every species, as well as every different species of reproductive fruit trees. And God saw that they were good. This was the close and the dawn of the third age. And then here comes where they're really stretching and trying to figure out what the heck's going on up in the sky. He said, let reflectors appear in the expanse of the heavens for a division between the day and the night, and let them serve to mark seasons, periods, and years. And now we remember how the people of those times used the stars as for navigation. I mean, they figured out what they could read, the pattern of the sky, to tell them all sorts of things. And that's, of course, what's laid out here. That the reason was that God put them up there so that you could figure it out, so that you could tell what's what. Now, of course, we know today that that's not true. So here we're faced with the first real glaring issue that we know this isn't true. So for someone who, this is like really, so if you're going to take, even for our Fenton, going from the original translation, obviously these bodies in the sky are not reflectors. I mean, obviously we know what they are today. We know that they're stars just like our sun. We know that there's other planets up there like our planet, maybe not capable of life, but we know that this is the case. But the idea that these aids in the sky, part of God's will, this always makes sense, because I'm always thinking about God's will as the opportunity for good is always present. So the fact of the matter is, gazing in the sky, you have an opportunity to figure out where you are. you have the opportunity to figure out what direction you're going in. It's nice because when the sun shines, you can see everything. I mean, and when the moon shines, maybe there's an opportunity for romance. I mean, hey, all this goes together. It's all part of God's will. But it doesn't mean that these things are like flat dishes up in the sky. Further, it tells in here about when it rains, what happened was that God opens up little holes. It's like the sky's like a colander that sits over the top of a flat earth, and they open it up and the rain falls through, and then they close it when they don't want any more. Now we know that that's not true. So anyone who wants to read it literally it just can't work, and I don't know how you could reconcile it. There's just no way. So okay, so then he says, let the waters be swarming with animal life, and let the birds fly in the expanse of the skies above the earth. And God accordingly produced the monsters of the deep. And the waters swarmed with every species of reptile, and also produced every species of flying bird. And God admired their beauty. And God, in giving them His blessing, said, be fruitful and multiply, so as to fill the waters of the deep. And also let the birds multiply upon the earth. And this was the close and the dawn of the fifth age. And of course then next he says, let the earth produce animal life. Several species of quadrupeds, as it says. Then the creation of man. And now here's what the original Hebrew says. God created man under His own shadow. Now this is a symbol for His image, right? In the image and likeness. But the shadow really kind of distinct from the real thing, right? So kind of that's an important distinction, right? That the shadow. So he says, let us make men under our shadow and as our representatives, and subject to them the fish of the waters and the birds of the sky and the quadrupeds, as well as the whole earth and every reptile that creeps upon it. Now this is the important passage. So God created men under His own shadow, under His own image, creating them in the image of God and constituting them male and female. And nothing about any rib here. Okay, now this is the first story. There's nothing about any rib in here. Constituting them male and female. God gave them His blessing, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, so as to fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over every living animal that moves upon the earth. Now this particular passage right here has been particularly troublesome to the earth, because it is interpreted as saying anything, you're men, you are made in the image of God, you can do whatever you want with the earth. But if we think about the connotation of rule, that to rule over there's also a responsibility to take care of, not just to be some kind of a crazy tyrant and it doesn't even make it, it doesn't make sense to think of it that way. So there's an aspect of stewardship here that needs to be considered, that really important. So, and God also said, see, I have given every fruit and grain-bearing plant upon the surface of the whole earth, as well as fruit and seed-bearing trees and all vegetation, so that they may be food for you, and for every animal of the earth, and for every bird of the sky, and for every reptile upon the earth, which possesses the life of animals. And it was done. By the way, He doesn't say in there that you can eat the animals. I know. We were just eating some animals over there on that pizza. But it's interesting that that's what it says, that the vegetation and the fruits is what we're supposed to be eating. I know I asked this to one of my teachers in seminary about this, and because in Unity, one of the teachings of the Fillmores was that it's better for you to be a vegetarian. And we're eating like roast beef sandwiches at lunch, and I asked the teacher, and he said, oh, don't worry about it, it's all God. And God gazed upon all that He had made, and it was very beautiful. Thus as the close came and the dawn came of the sixth age. And thus the whole host of heavens as well as the earth were completed. And God rested at the seventh age from all the works which He had made. Therefore, God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because He then rested from all the work which God had arranged to do. So here we see the seventh day of the week is a symbol for the seventh age of creation, the rest. Really important, this idea of rest. We need to rest. We need to regenerate. We need to renew. So this is like saying you go out into the world, you do as God did, you create in the world, but after your work, you rest. In other words, you take a moment for quietness. You take a moment to charge the batteries, so to speak. So really, it's like an instruction that's just helpful. You can't keep working all the time. You've got to have rest. There's got to be a break in between. You need to have a rest. But it wasn't like if you don't keep the day that you should be punished, right? So it's kind of like, if you have a little kid in the house and they burn themselves on the hot stove, the burning is the lesson, right? They burnt themselves, so they probably aren't going to touch the stove again, right? So the lesson was they touched the stove, they got burnt. You don't need to break their arm on top of it, to really get your point across. So there's no reason to punish somebody for not resting. The not resting will be the punishment in itself. You don't have to worry about it. Well, then there's a second story. There's a second story. He says, the ever-living God afterwards formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the life of animals. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Just the last chapter. Just the last chapter made men under his own image, right? But here now we've got another story. That he shapes men out of the dust of the ground and breathes life into them. And he says, as with the life of the animals, right? But man became a life-containing soul. So here's the idea that animals don't have souls. That's where it's put forward. But the ever-living God then planted a Garden of Eden in the east, and there